You embarrassed me in front of everyone, my daughter whispered through clenched teeth before she struck my face with the back of her hand at her 38th birthday party. The jazz music never stopped. Crystal glasses still clinked across the rooftop ballroom. And 20 minutes later, a black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the hotel entrance and changed every single thing. I'm glad you're here. Stay with my story until the end, and tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The Chicago skyline shimmered behind the glass walls of the rooftop lounge like a field of diamonds scattered across the night sky. Everywhere I looked, there were silk dresses, expensive watches, polished smiles, and waiters carrying silver trays filled with champagne flutes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. My daughter Vanessa loved places like this. Places where nobody raised their voice too loudly, and everyone pretended happiness could be purchased with valet parking and imported flowers. I stood near the back of the ballroom, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy cardigan while trying not to feel out of place. I had spent nearly 40 minutes driving through downtown traffic in my old Buick to make it there on time. The parking attendant had looked at my car for half a second before asking if I was delivering something. I smiled anyway. At 68, I had learned that dignity often survives in silence. Vanessa was standing near the giant gold birthday display taking photographs with her guests when she finally noticed me. Even from across the room, I could see the disappointment spread across her face. Not warmth, not surprise, just disappointment. Her eyes moved slowly over my shoes, my handbag, my simple silver necklace. The necklace had belonged to her father. I still wore it almost every day. "Mom," she said as she approached me, her smile tight enough to crack glass. "You actually wore that?" I looked down at my cardigan. "It's chilly tonight. This is a luxury venue," she muttered quietly. "People here matter." I pretended not to hear the last part. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." I reached into my purse and handed her a small velvet box. Inside was the diamond bracelet my husband Oliver had bought before cancer took him 4 years ago. He had wanted Vanessa to have it one day. Vanessa barely glanced at it before shutting the lid. "You could have at least tried tonight," she said under her breath. Around us, laughter echoed beneath the hanging chandeliers while a piano player performed old Sinatra songs near the bar. Nobody noticed the way my daughter's jaw tightened every time someone looked in my direction. Or maybe they did notice and simply chose comfort over kindness. That happens more often than people admit. I watched Vanessa return to her guests while introducing Ethan to a group of investors near the windows. My son-in-law wore a tailored charcoal suit and the expression of a man constantly calculating his next opportunity. Every few minutes, Vanessa glanced back toward me with irritation growing more visible each time. I suddenly remembered the little girl who used to wait by the front window every evening for me to come home from my second job. Back then, she never cared what I wore. She only cared that I came back. A waitress approached carrying a tray of champagne. "Would you like one, ma'am?" Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared beside us again. "No," she interrupted quickly. "She's fine." The waitress gave me an awkward smile before walking away. Vanessa grabbed my wrist gently, but firmly enough to make her meaning clear. "Mom, can I talk to you for a second?" She pulled me toward the hallway near the restrooms where the music became muffled behind heavy velvet curtains. Her face changed immediately once we were alone. The polished social smile disappeared completely. "Do you have any idea how hard I worked to make tonight perfect?" she snapped. "Vanessa, no. Listen to me for once." Her voice lowered sharply. "Everyone here is important. Investors, attorneys, people Ethan and I need connections with. And then you walk in looking like..." She stopped herself, but not before I saw the disgust flash across her face. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. "Looking like what?" She laughed once under her breath. "Cold. Humorless. Like trash, Mom." The word landed. Harder than I expected. Not because it was loud. Because it was quiet. Deliberate. Practiced. Somewhere behind the ballroom doors, guests began singing happy birthday while camera flashes lit the ceiling. Vanessa shook her head slowly as if embarrassed to even stand beside me. "You always do this," she whispered. "You make people uncomfortable. You don't belong in places like this." Then her hand brushed sharply across my cheek in one quick motion, born more from humiliation than rage. The hallway fell silent afterward. Even Vanessa looked stunned for half a second by what she had done. I touched my cheek gently, but said nothing. I simply looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time in years, I realized my daughter no longer saw me as a mother, only as something she wanted hidden. Vanessa exhaled shakily and glanced back toward the ballroom. Just go home, she muttered. Please. I checked the small silver watch on my wrist. Then I smiled softly. No, I said quietly. I think I'll stay another 20 minutes. Before she could answer, the elevator doors opened at the end of the hallway. And somewhere below us on the street, a Rolls-Royce pulled up to the front entrance of the hotel. Vanessa stared at me for several seconds after I spoke, as if she could not decide whether I was serious or simply too stubborn to understand humiliation when it was handed to me directly. The hallway lights reflected against the marble floor beneath us, while muffled laughter drifted through the ballroom doors behind her. Somewhere inside, guests continued celebrating her birthday without realizing the entire night was beginning to shift beneath their feet. Mom, do not do this tonight, she said quietly. Please. I noticed the panic hiding underneath her irritation now. Not guilt. Fear. The kind of fear people develop when they sense something slipping beyond their control. I adjusted the sleeve of my cardigan carefully and gave her a small nod. Go enjoy your party, Vanessa. She folded her arms tightly across her chest. Why are you acting like this? I almost smiled at the question, because for years, I had asked myself the exact same thing about her. When had my daughter started looking at people as investments instead of human beings? When had kindness become embarrassing to her? When had she learned to measure worth by watches, cars, and rooftop views? I remembered the first apartment I rented after Oliver and I got married. 600 square feet on the south side of Chicago with windows that rattled every winter when the wind came off Lake Michigan. We had one used couch, a tiny kitchen table, and exactly $93 left in our checking account after paying the security deposit. But I still remember laughing with him while we ate canned soup sitting on the floor because we could not afford chairs yet. Back then, success meant surviving together. Somewhere along the way, Vanessa began believing success meant leaving people behind. She shook her head impatiently. I cannot deal with one of your silent guilt trips right now. I am not guilting you, I answered calmly. I am looking at you. That seemed to upset her more than anything else. Her eyes darted toward the ballroom entrance as two guests stepped into the hallway laughing before immediately growing quiet when they noticed us standing there. Vanessa forced a smile toward them until they disappeared into the elevator. Then her face hardened again. You have no idea how hard Ethan and I have worked to build this life. I looked at her carefully. Do you really believe you built it alone? For a second, something flickered across her expression. Defensiveness. Shame maybe. But it vanished almost instantly. Here we go, she muttered. You always do this. You always make everything about sacrifice. I did not answer right away. Instead, I glanced through the ballroom doors where I could see Ethan standing beside the giant champagne tower, speaking with a gray-haired man in an expensive navy suit. Ethan laughed too loudly at something the man said. He always laughed that way around wealthy people, as though every conversation was an audition. Your father sacrificed quietly, I said at last. That is why you never noticed it. Vanessa exhaled sharply through her nose. Dad understood ambition. That one hurt more than the word trash. Not because she intended cruelty, because she truly believed it. I lowered my eyes briefly toward the bracelet box still clutched in her hand. She had forgotten she was holding it. Oliver spent nearly 3 months searching for that bracelet before Vanessa graduated from law school. I remembered him standing in our kitchen late one night studying jewelry catalogs under the yellow stove light while drinking cold coffee because he wanted to buy her something timeless. One day, he had whispered to me back then, she will understand everything we built was for her. I wonder now if parents ever truly know their children at all. Vanessa suddenly noticed where I was looking and awkwardly shoved the bracelet box into her purse. Look, she said more softly. Tonight matters for Ethan. There are people here connected to Hale Capital. If everything goes right, his company could finally move into national development projects. Hale Capital. I almost laughed at the irony. Instead, I simply nodded once. I see. She leaned closer, lowering her voice again. So please, just keep your distance tonight. Stay in the background for a little while longer. Stay in the background. The words settled over me strangely, because I had spent almost my entire life there already. Working quietly, protecting quietly, sacrificing quietly. Even after Oliver passed away, I stayed hidden exactly where he told me to stay. People reveal themselves when they believe you cannot change their future, he once told me during his final weeks in hospice care. At the time, I did not fully understand what he meant. I understood now. The elevator doors opened again at the far end of the hallway. Vanessa glanced over automatically before freezing completely. Two men stepped out wearing dark suits and overcoats despite the warm spring evening. Behind them came a tall, older gentleman carrying a leather portfolio beneath his arm. Even from across the hallway, I recognized Raymond Hale immediately. His silver hair was combed neatly back, and his expression carried the same calm precision it always had during the 30 years he served as Oliver's attorney and closest friend. Raymond spotted me almost instantly. Then he smiled warmly. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called out politely. "I hope we did not keep you waiting." Beside me, Vanessa stopped breathing for a moment. I could feel it. Vanessa stared at Raymond Hale as though she had suddenly forgotten how to speak. The color drained slowly from her face while the sounds of the birthday party continued behind us with cruel normalcy. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed loudly near the piano. A woman somewhere inside the ballroom began singing along to the music, completely unaware that my daughter's entire understanding of her life had just started collapsing piece by piece. Raymond walked toward me with the same calm confidence he had carried for decades. The two younger men beside him remained slightly behind, professional and silent. One of them held a leather document case embossed with the Whitmore family crest in dark silver lettering. I had not seen that crest displayed publicly in years. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitmore," Raymond said warmly as he reached me. "You look lovely tonight." "Thank you, Raymond." I smiled softly. Traffic was dreadful. He gave a quiet laugh. "Chicago never changes." Beside me, Vanessa finally found her voice again. "Mr. Hale?" she asked carefully. "What are you doing here?" Raymond turned toward her politely. "Miss Carter, happy birthday." She blinked quickly. "You know my mother?" The question hung in the hallway longer than it should have. Raymond's expression shifted almost invisibly before he answered. "I worked with your father and mother for many years." "Worked with, not for." "With." I noticed the moment Vanessa heard the difference. Her shoulders stiffened slightly. Ethan suddenly appeared from the ballroom entrance, clearly drawn by the unusual silence gathering in the hallway. His confident expression faded the second he recognized Raymond Hale. "Sir," Ethan said immediately, straightening his jacket. "I did not realize you were attending tonight." Of course he knew who Raymond was. Everyone in Chicago real estate knew the Hale family name. Hale Capital controlled half the commercial developments stretching from Illinois to Wisconsin. Ethan had spent the last year desperately trying to secure financing connections through them. Raymond acknowledged him with a brief nod before returning his attention to me. "The board members are waiting downstairs whenever you are ready." Ethan frowned slightly. "Board members?" Raymond looked mildly surprised by the question. "For Whitmore Logistics." Silence. Real silence this time. Even the music behind the ballroom doors seemed far away suddenly. Ethan's eyes moved slowly toward me, confusion beginning to replace confidence. Vanessa gave a nervous laugh that sounded painfully forced. "I think there is some misunderstanding," she said quickly. "My mother is retired." Raymond did not smile. "Mrs. Whitmore has never been retired." I watched Vanessa carefully in that moment. The tiny movements, the tension building around her mouth, the way her fingers tightened around the chain strap of her designer purse. For years, she had built an entire version of reality around herself. In that reality, I was small, harmless, outdated, a lonely widow living quietly in an old condo while depending on occasional family visits to feel important. It never once occurred to her that quiet and powerless were not the same thing. Ethan cleared his throat awkwardly. "I am sorry," he said carefully, looking at me now with new uncertainty. "Whitmore Logistics, as in the shipping corporation?" "Transportation and international freight," Raymond corrected calmly. "Mrs. Whitmore currently serves as majority chair." Ethan's face changed instantly after hearing that. I had seen that exact look before from bankers, investors, and politicians over the years. The sudden recalculation. Respect born not from character, but from perceived value. It always disappointed me a little. Vanessa shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered almost to herself. "Dad sold most of that company years ago. Your father stepped away from public operations," Raymond explained. "Ownership remained private." Ethan looked stunned. "Private under who?" Raymond glanced toward me first before answering. "Mrs. Whitmore." I folded my hands quietly in front of me, while watching the truth spread across their faces. Oliver had hidden the structure intentionally after his diagnosis. Too many people circled wealthy families once illness appeared. Too many opportunists. Too many false friends. After he died, I honored his wishes exactly as he asked. No interviews. No public appearances. No luxury displays. I continued attending quarterly meetings quietly while allowing the world to assume Whitmore Logistics belonged to anonymous investors. Sometimes invisibility is protection. Sometimes it is a test. Vanessa suddenly laughed again, but this time the sound trembled. "Mom," she said carefully, "why would you hide something like that?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I never hid it from you." Her expression tightened. "You never told me. You never asked." That one landed harder than anything else said all night. Ethan shifted uneasily beside her, while several nearby guests had started openly staring toward the hallway now. Word spreads quickly in rooms built on status. One whisper becomes 20 in less than a minute. I could already feel people trying to piece together connections they had completely missed earlier in the evening. Raymond glanced discreetly toward my cheek where Vanessa's hand had brushed me earlier. His expression darkened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "if you prefer, we can postpone tonight's meeting." Vanessa's head snapped toward him immediately. "Meeting?" she repeated. Raymond looked at her calmly. Tonight was the final review concerning the North Shore expansion agreement and family trust restructuring. Vanessa swallowed hard. Family trust. I finally looked directly at my daughter again. Really looked at her. The frightened little girl she once was seemed completely gone now, buried beneath years of ambition and performance and shame. "Your father believed character mattered most when nobody thought you had anything to gain," I said softly. "That was the only lesson he insisted I never interfere with." Then I turned toward Raymond. "No," I said calmly. "Let us not postpone anything tonight." The hallway no longer belonged to Vanessa's birthday party. You could feel it in the silence spreading through the room beyond the velvet curtains. Conversations had started slowing one by one as guests noticed Ethan standing rigid beside me and Raymond Hale speaking in a voice low enough to command attention without ever becoming loud. Wealthy people recognize power the same way sailors recognize storms. Quietly, instinctively, Vanessa looked toward the ballroom as if searching for solid ground somewhere among the chandeliers and champagne towers. Instead, she found people staring back at her with growing curiosity. A woman near the bar whispered something into her husband's ear while glancing toward me. Another guest discreetly pulled out his phone, probably searching Whitmore Logistics online beneath the tablecloth. It amazed me how quickly human beings rewrote their opinions once money entered the room. 20 minutes earlier, I had been invisible. Now suddenly, everyone wanted to understand who I was. Ethan stepped closer to Raymond with the careful politeness of a man realizing he may have spent the evening speaking to opportunity without recognizing it. "Sir," he said cautiously, "I had no idea Vanessa's family was connected to Whitmore Logistics." Connected. Another interesting word. Raymond adjusted the cuff of his coat calmly. "Mrs. Whitmore is Whitmore Logistics." Ethan blinked once. Hard. I watched him recalculate everything in real time. Every holiday dinner. Every awkward conversation. Every moment he had politely tolerated me sitting quietly at the edge of family events while assuming I was simply an aging widow with sentimental stories and outdated sweaters. Vanessa finally turned toward me fully now, her voice softer than I had heard it all evening. "Mom," she said carefully, "why did Dad never tell me any of this?" There it was again. Not why did you hide it from me? Why did Dad never tell me? Even now, she still imagined herself excluded by powerful men rather than confronted by her own choices. I folded my hands loosely in front of me. "Your father believed inheritance without character destroys people." Ethan glanced uneasily toward Vanessa before quickly looking away again. He understood the implication immediately. Vanessa did too. She just did not want to accept it yet. Raymond opened the leather portfolio he carried and removed several documents secured neatly inside cream-colored folders. Even the paper looked expensive. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently, "the board is prepared whenever you wish." Vanessa stared at the folders as though they might explode. "Board," she repeated faintly. "Tonight's restructuring meeting involves final authority over the North Shore shipping corridor acquisition," Raymond explained calmly. "The signatures cannot proceed without Mrs. Whitmore present." Ethan's face changed instantly after hearing that. North Shore was not a small project. Every real estate publication in Chicago had been covering rumors about that development for nearly a year. Billions of dollars. Shipping ports. International freight contracts. Entire neighborhoods expected to transform around the expansion. I suddenly understood why Ethan looked slightly pale. He had spent months chasing connections that led straight back to the woman his wife had just called trash beside the restrooms. Life has a cruel sense of timing sometimes. The ballroom doors opened wider behind us as more guests drifted toward the hallway, pretending to search for drinks or restrooms while openly trying to overhear the conversation. Vanessa noticed them immediately. Her shoulders tightened with panic. Public humiliation feels very different when you are no longer controlling the room. Maybe we should discuss this privately, she whispered urgently. Raymond looked politely confused. Everything here is already public knowledge in the business community. That sentence landed like ice water. Vanessa swallowed hard. Business community? She repeated. Raymond nodded once. Your mother has chaired Whitmore Logistics for 4 years. For years. Exactly the amount of time since Oliver died. For years of quarterly meetings. 4 years of conference calls from my quiet condo overlooking Lakeshore Drive. For years of signing contracts at long walnut tables while wearing the same simple cardigans Vanessa found embarrassing. I remembered leaving board meetings and stopping at grocery stores afterward because I preferred choosing my own fruit instead of paying for delivery. Some executives found that strange. Oliver always laughed about it. The minute rich people stop doing ordinary things, he used to say, they stop understanding ordinary people. I missed him terribly in moments like this. Vanessa suddenly stepped closer to me, lowering her voice sharply. Mom, please. The words sounded unfamiliar coming from her now. Softer. Careful. Fear changes tone faster than love ever does. Please what? I asked quietly. She glanced toward the growing crowd around us before answering. Can we go somewhere and talk? I looked at her for several long seconds. Then I noticed her hand trembling slightly against her purse strap. Not from sadness. From realization. She was finally beginning to understand that tonight was not simply embarrassing. It was dangerous. Dangerous for the image she had built. Dangerous for Ethan's ambitions. Dangerous for the future they assumed would eventually belong to them automatically. Raymond checked his watch discreetly. Mrs. Whitmore, the investors are waiting downstairs with the acquisition attorneys. Before I could answer, one of the guests suddenly approached us from the ballroom entrance. Older gentleman. White hair. Expensive black tuxedo. I recognized him immediately as Senator Daniel Mercer from Illinois. He smiled warmly the second he saw me. Helen, he said with genuine surprise. I had no idea you were attending tonight. Behind me, Vanessa stopped breathing again. Senator Mercer walked toward me with the relaxed confidence of a man used to entering rooms where everyone immediately recognized him. Several guests near the ballroom entrance straightened the moment they noticed him approaching. Conversations lowered into whispers. Phones disappeared discreetly into purses and jacket pockets. Power changes the atmosphere around it. You can feel it before a single word is spoken. Helen, the senator said warmly as he reached us, taking both my hands gently in his. It has been far too long. Daniel, I replied with a small smile. You still work too much. He laughed softly. That sounds exactly like Oliver. At the mention of my husband's name, something inside my chest tightened briefly. Oliver had known Senator Mercer since their 20s, back when both of them were still borrowing suits for business meetings and eating cheap steaks at diners near the river because it was all they could afford. Success came later. Loyalty came first. The senator glanced toward Raymond and nodded politely before turning back to me again. I heard the board meeting was tonight, he said. I wanted to stop by personally before heading to Springfield tomorrow morning. Around us, guests had gone almost completely silent now. I could feel dozens of eyes shifting between the senator, Raymond Hale, Ethan, and me while trying desperately to understand what kind of woman quietly attends a birthday party in an old cardigan and somehow knows people powerful enough to move markets with a phone call. Vanessa stood frozen beside the hallway wall, gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Ethan looked like a man watching his entire future rearrange itself in real time. Senator Mercer finally seemed to notice them standing there. Oh, he said politely, forgive me. I interrupted family time. Ethan immediately stepped forward with his professional smile, returning in pieces. Senator Mercer, it is an honor to meet you. Likewise. The senator shook his hand briefly before looking toward Vanessa. And you must be Helen's daughter. Vanessa forced a stiff smile. Yes. Vanessa Carter. Your mother speaks very highly of you. That almost made me sad. Because it was true. Even after everything tonight, I still had. Mothers carry love like old scars. Sometimes painful, sometimes invisible, but always there. Vanessa swallowed hard before speaking carefully. I did not realize you knew my mother so well. Senator Mercer looked genuinely surprised. Your mother helped fund 3 transportation initiatives across Illinois over the last decade. He smiled toward me again. Frankly, half the people in this city owe Helen Whitmore favors whether they realize it or not. Another silence followed that. Heavier this time. Somewhere behind us, the piano player inside the ballroom started performing Moon River while waiters quietly continued carrying trays through conversations that no longer sounded natural. The entire party felt tilted now, off balance. Ethan glanced toward me carefully. Mrs. Whitmore, he said slowly, almost testing the name now. I had no idea you were involved at that level. Involved. Interesting how quickly language changes once respect enters the room. I remembered holidays where Ethan barely looked up from his phone while I cleared dinner plates alone in the kitchen. I remembered Vanessa joking about my tiny little condo in front of friends while laughing too loudly afterward. I remembered showing up to Emma's piano recital last year and overhearing Vanessa tell another mother, "My mom is sweet, but she is old-fashioned and kind of isolated." Isolated. Meanwhile, I had spent that exact morning reviewing international freight negotiations worth more money than Ethan would likely earn in 10 lifetimes. The senator noticed the tension immediately. Experienced politicians always do. "Everything all right here?" he asked gently. Before anyone could answer, Raymond spoke calmly beside me. Mrs. Whitmore was just preparing to leave for the acquisition meeting downstairs. Senator Mercer nodded approvingly. North Shore is a major project. Then he looked directly at Ethan. Your wife should be very proud of her mother. Ethan opened his mouth slightly, but no words came out. Vanessa lowered her eyes toward the marble floor. For the first time all evening, she looked small again. Not glamorous, not polished, just frightened. I watched her carefully and suddenly remembered another birthday long ago. Vanessa turning 8 years old in our tiny backyard while Oliver grilled hamburgers on a secondhand barbecue that barely worked. She wore a paper crown from the grocery store bakery and spent half the evening chasing fireflies in the grass while laughing so hard she could barely breathe. Back then, she used to run toward me every time something wonderful happened. Somewhere along the road to luxury condos and private schools and networking dinners, she began running away instead. Raymond closed the leather portfolio quietly. Mrs. Whitmore, he said gently, the investors are becoming anxious. I nodded once. Of course. Vanessa looked up immediately. Mom, wait. Her voice cracked slightly this time. Real emotion finally beginning to push through the performance. She stepped closer toward me while lowering her voice. Can we please talk privately before you leave? I studied her face for several long seconds. The expensive makeup, the carefully styled blonde hair, the panic hiding behind her eyes. She looked beautiful tonight. She also looked exhausted. Pretending to belong to a world built entirely on appearances is tiring work. Not tonight, I answered softly. Tonight is for learning. Her face tightened painfully. Mom, you were embarrassed by me long before this evening, Vanessa. I adjusted the sleeve of my cardigan slowly. The difference is that tonight, everyone else finally saw it too. Then Raymond stepped aside respectfully as the elevator doors opened once more behind him. The 2 security men moved first. Senator Mercer gave me a warm nod. And beyond the hotel windows, the black Rolls-Royce still waited below like the final sentence in a conversation nobody in that hallway would ever forget. The elevator ride down to the private conference level lasted less than a minute, but it felt strangely longer because of the silence inside it. Raymond stood beside me reviewing documents on his tablet, while the 2 security men remained near the doors without speaking. Senator Mercer had stayed upstairs for a few additional minutes, likely to enjoy watching Chicago society quietly panic behind champagne glasses. I almost smiled at the thought. Across from me, the mirrored elevator walls reflected a woman I barely recognized anymore. Silver hair neatly pinned back, navy cardigan, simple pearl earrings, calm eyes. the faint pink mark still visible against my cheek where Vanessa's hand had brushed me earlier. I touched it lightly for a second before lowering my hand again. Physical pain fades quickly at my age. Emotional disappointment lingers much longer. The elevator doors opened into a private marble lobby guarded by hotel security. Beyond the glass conference doors waited 12 people seated around a long walnut table overlooking the city skyline. Some stood the moment I entered. Others nodded respectfully. Every single person in that room knew exactly who I was. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitmore," one of the investors said immediately. "We were beginning to worry the party upstairs had stolen you away." "Only briefly," I answered calmly. Light laughter moved around the table. Professional. Controlled. I removed my cardigan carefully before sitting at the head of the table where Oliver used to sit during his final years. The chair still felt strange sometimes. Not because I doubted I belonged there. Because I still occasionally expected to see him walking through the doors carrying his reading glasses and complaining about hotel coffee. Grief changes shape over time. In the beginning, it crushes you. Later, it simply sits quietly beside you like an old companion. Raymond placed several folders before me while the attorneys organized presentation screens near the windows. "Before we begin," he said gently, "there is one final matter involving the Whitmore family trust." The room quieted immediately. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Go ahead." Raymond opened the leather portfolio and removed a sealed envelope with Oliver's handwriting across the front. "For Helen, if necessary." My chest tightened the moment I saw it. Oliver wrote that envelope during his final week in hospice care. I remembered the rain outside the hospital windows that evening. I remembered the smell of antiseptic and coffee drifting through the hallway, while machines quietly monitored the man I loved for 43 years. "Promise me something," he whispered back then while struggling to catch his breath. "Do not protect Vanessa from herself forever." At the time, I cried and told him not to speak like that. I was still foolish enough to believe love alone could prevent certain endings. Raymond looked around the room carefully before continuing. As instructed by Oliver Whitmore, the family trust remained inactive pending final behavioral review clauses concerning primary beneficiary conduct. One of the younger investors frowned slightly. "Behavioral review?" Raymond nodded once. Mr. Whitmore believed wealth without moral foundation becomes destructive over generations. He opened the envelope carefully and unfolded several pages. "The trust transfers controlling inheritance shares to Vanessa Carter under one condition." The room remained completely still now. Even the city sounds outside seemed far away behind the thick glass windows. Raymond adjusted his glasses before reading aloud. "The beneficiary must demonstrate consistent respect, discretion, and compassionate treatment toward immediate family members, specifically Helen Whitmore, both publicly and privately." Silence followed. Heavy silence. One attorney slowly lowered his pen onto the table without making a sound. Raymond continued reading calmly. "Any verified act of public humiliation, coercion, abandonment, or intentional degradation directed toward Helen Whitmore immediately suspends beneficiary access pending board review." My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. Oliver always believed character reveals itself most clearly when no reward seems attached to kindness. That was why he structured the trust this way. Not as punishment, as protection. For everyone. Raymond lowered the papers slowly. "Unfortunately, several witnesses tonight observed conduct triggering immediate review protocols." No one spoke for several seconds afterward. Finally, one investor cleared his throat carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore," he asked gently, "are you formally invoking the suspension clause?" I looked out across the Chicago skyline glowing beyond the windows while thinking about Vanessa at 8 years old running barefoot through our backyard chasing fireflies. I thought about her first heartbreak at 16 when she cried in my lap for hours because a boy at school embarrassed her in front of friends. I thought about college graduations, wedding photographs, family Christmas mornings. Mothers do not stop loving their children simply because their children stop seeing them clearly. That is the tragedy of it. "Not yet," I answered quietly. Several people exchanged surprised looks around the table. Raymond studied me carefully. "Helen," he said softly, dropping formalities for the first time all evening. "After tonight, nobody would question your decision." "I know." I folded Oliver's letter carefully in my hands. "But humiliation teaches differently than revenge does. One of the attorneys glanced toward the conference room television mounted against the wall. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said carefully, "there may already be another issue developing." He pressed a button on the remote. The hotel ballroom security footage appeared on the screen. There was Vanessa standing in the hallway beside me less than an hour earlier. Clear camera angle. Clear audio. Clear view of her face as she whispered the word trash directly at me before brushing her hand sharply across my cheek. Nobody in the room spoke after that, because suddenly this was no longer family pain hidden privately behind closed doors. It was evidence. The security footage ended with the image of Vanessa standing frozen in the hallway while I looked at her quietly, without anger or surprise. Then the screen went black. Nobody in the conference room moved for several seconds afterward. The silence felt heavy enough to press against the windows. One of the younger attorneys slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose while avoiding eye contact with anyone. Another investor shifted uncomfortably in his chair before reaching for his water glass with both hands. I realized then that embarrassment spreads through rooms faster than rage ever does, especially among powerful people who spend their lives carefully managing appearances. Raymond lowered the remote control onto the polished walnut table. "The footage is time-stamped and stored within hotel security archives," he said calmly. "Legally speaking, the trust review clause is now unavoidable." I looked down at Oliver's letter still resting quietly in my hands. His handwriting always leaned slightly to the right whenever he was tired. The final months of his illness made every word look heavier somehow. I remembered sitting beside his hospital bed late one evening while snow drifted quietly outside the windows. He was too weak to lift his coffee cup properly anymore, so I held it while he drank. "Helen," he whispered back then, "promise me something. Anything." He smiled faintly. "Do not confuse forgiveness with surrender." At the time, I thought he was talking about business. I understand now he was preparing me for family. Across the table, one of the board members cleared his throat carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began gently, "if the suspension activates, Miss Carter loses immediate access to all trust distributions tied to the estate." I nodded once. "I understand. That includes the Lake Forest property," another attorney added quietly, "as well as the downtown penthouse and investment accounts connected through the family holding structure." Lake Forest, penthouse, investment accounts. Hearing the words spoken aloud made something inside me ache unexpectedly. Vanessa never realized those homes were not gifts from Ethan's success. They were protections from her father. Quiet safeguards built years before she even married. Oliver always worried Vanessa loved appearances too much. He used to joke gently about it during dinners. "Our daughter would put gold trim on paper towels if she could," he once laughed. Vanessa would roll her eyes and kiss his cheek while stealing fries from his plate. Back then, it felt harmless. Small vanity, small ambition. Nobody notices when little things slowly become character. Raymond opened another folder before sliding several documents toward me. "There is one additional complication." I looked up. "What complication?" 2 months ago, Ethan Carter submitted preliminary proposals seeking financing connections through Hale Capital for his development firm. I stayed quiet. The requests included projections relying heavily on anticipated future trust access through his wife. Around the table, several faces tightened immediately. One investor muttered something beneath his breath that sounded deeply unimpressed. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "You are telling me Ethan built expansion plans assuming Vanessa's inheritance was guaranteed?" Raymond nodded carefully. "It appears so." I closed my eyes briefly. Not from anger. From exhaustion. Suddenly dozens of little moments over the past few years rearranged themselves inside my mind. Ethan encouraging Vanessa to host larger charity galas than they could comfortably afford. The sudden luxury vacations. The designer renovations. The way Ethan once casually joked during Christmas dinner that family legacy money should stay productive. At the time, I ignored the comment because Oliver had already passed and grief made everything feel fragile. Now I understood something painful. They had not simply been waiting for inheritance someday. They had already emotionally spent it. One of the attorneys looked toward me carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, with your authorization, we can freeze all connected distributions immediately before market opening tomorrow morning." Freeze. Such a cold word. Strange how financial language removes humanity from everything it touches. Freeze accounts. Suspend access. Reallocate assets. Behind every legal term sits a family somewhere breaking apart quietly at dinner tables. I stood slowly from my chair and walked toward the conference room windows overlooking the city. Chicago glowed beneath the night sky in rivers of gold and white light stretching for miles beyond the lakefront. Somewhere above us, Vanessa's birthday party was probably still limping forward awkwardly while guests whispered into champagne glasses and checked business articles online. I wondered if she was crying yet. Then I hated myself slightly for wondering. Mothers never fully stop protecting their children emotionally. Even after humiliation, even after disappointment. It is almost a sickness sometimes. Raymond approached quietly beside me. "Helen," he said softly, "Oliver trusted your judgment completely." I stared out toward the city lights without answering right away. Finally I spoke. "Do you know what hurts the most?" Raymond remained silent. She thought being mistaken for ordinary was shameful. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "Your husband never believed ordinary people were beneath him," Raymond replied gently. "That is why everyone respected him." I smiled faintly. No, they respected him because he never needed anyone to feel smaller for him to feel important. Behind us, the conference room remained completely silent. Nobody interrupted. Nobody pretended not to listen. After a long moment, I turned back toward the table. "Freeze the discretionary distributions," I said calmly. Several attorneys immediately began making notes. "But leave Vanessa's personal accounts untouched for now." Raymond looked slightly surprised. "You are still giving her room to recover from this?" "No," I answered quietly. "I am giving her room to understand it." Then the conference room doors suddenly opened behind us. Everyone turned at once. Vanessa stood there alone with tears running silently down her face. Vanessa stood motionless near the conference room doorway as though stepping inside had cost her the last pieces of her pride. Her mascara had begun to smudge beneath her eyes, and for the first time that evening, she no longer looked polished or untouchable. She looked tired, human, frightened in the way children become frightened after suddenly realizing adults cannot always protect them from consequences. Nobody at the conference table spoke. One by one, the attorneys quietly gathered their documents while avoiding direct eye contact with her. Wealthy people understand humiliation very well. They simply prefer watching it happen to someone else. Raymond approached Vanessa first with gentle professionalism. "Miss Carter," he said softly, "would you like a moment alone with your mother?" Vanessa nodded immediately without trusting herself to speak. The room slowly emptied after that. Chairs slid quietly against marble floors. Briefcases closed. Soft footsteps disappeared into the hallway one by one until only Raymond and I remained beside the windows overlooking the city. He paused near the doorway before leaving. "Helen," he said carefully, "call me if you need anything tonight." I gave a small nod. Then the door closed behind him. Silence settled over the room almost instantly. Vanessa remained near the entrance, staring down at the carpet while twisting the strap of her purse between trembling fingers. The same little nervous habit she had as a teenager whenever she lied to me about where she had been after curfew. I waited quietly. Eventually she whispered, "I did not know." Her voice sounded painfully small inside the giant conference room. "No," I answered calmly. "You did not." Vanessa looked up sharply then. "Why are you acting like this is all my fault?" I almost smiled from sadness more than anger. Some instincts survive even when everything else falls apart. Defensiveness. Justification. The desperate need to avoid standing fully inside your own choices. I walked slowly back toward the walnut table and rested my fingertips against the polished wood where Oliver once sat during negotiations. "Do you know what I remember most about your father?" I asked quietly. Vanessa wiped beneath her eyes quickly. "Mom, please. I remember how carefully he treated waitresses." She frowned slightly in confusion. "What? Restaurants? Airports? Grocery stores?" "Your father believed the truest measure of character was how someone treated people who could do nothing for them." I looked toward her again. "Tonight you thought I could do nothing for you." Her face crumpled slightly after hearing that. Real pain this time. Not social embarrassment. Not panic about money. Something deeper beginning to crack open underneath years of performance and entitlement. "I was angry," she whispered weakly. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." "By existing?" The question landed harder than shouting ever could have. Vanessa lowered herself slowly into one of the conference chairs and covered her face with both hands. For several seconds, The only sound in the room came from her uneven breathing and the faint hum of downtown traffic far below the windows. I watched my daughter quietly and suddenly saw traces of the little girl she used to be hiding beneath everything else. The little girl who once begged me to stay awake beside her bed during thunderstorms because she hated lightning. The little girl who cried after accidentally stepping on a bird in our backyard when she was 9 years old. Compassion is not something people are born without. Sometimes they simply bury it beneath ambition long enough that they forget where they left it. Ethan knows now, does he not? I asked gently. Vanessa nodded slowly without lifting her face. He left. I stayed quiet. After the investors started talking upstairs, her voice cracked again. He asked me why I never told him who you really were. That sentence sat strangely inside me. Who you really were. As though wealth had suddenly transformed me into someone different than the woman who raised her. And what did you say? I asked softly. Vanessa finally lowered her hands from her face. Tears streaked silently down her cheeks now. I told him I did not know. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly. The conference room suddenly felt too large for only two people carrying this much history between them. That is not entirely true, I said quietly. She looked confused. What do you mean? You knew I worked after your father died. I thought you were consulting. You knew I paid for your law school. Dad left money. You knew I never once asked you for help. Her breathing slowed gradually as realization began settling more painfully into place. Not realization about money. About blindness. I did not want to see it, she whispered finally. There it was. The truth at last. Not ignorance. Choice. I folded my hands together carefully on the table. You spent so many years trying to become accepted by people with power that you started treating ordinary people like disappointments. Vanessa shook her head immediately. That is not fair. No, I answered softly. Fair would have been learning this lesson before tonight. Tears continued slipping quietly down her face while she stared at the table between us. Are you taking everything away from me? She asked after a long silence. Such a human question. Not are you hurt. Not can you forgive me. Fear reaches money faster than emotion most of the time. I looked toward the city lights glowing beyond the windows before answering carefully. Your father built that trust to protect our family from greed. I turned back toward her. Tonight, he was proven right. Vanessa closed her eyes tightly after hearing that. Then very softly, almost like a child again, she whispered the words I never expected to hear from her. Mom, I think I became someone Dad would not recognize. Vanessa's words stayed with me long after we left the conference room that night. I think I became someone Dad would not recognize. The sentence followed me into the elevator, into the marble lobby, and all the way through the quiet Chicago streets as the Rolls-Royce carried me home beneath the glow of streetlights reflecting against rain-soaked pavement. Raymond sat across from me during the drive, while reviewing final documents beneath the small reading lamp built into the car door. Outside the window, the city moved in blurred gold streaks through the rain. Beautiful from a distance. Lonely up close. You were gentle with her tonight, Raymond said softly without looking up from the papers. I rested my head lightly against the leather seat. Was I? Most people in your position would have destroyed her financially before midnight. I looked back out toward the city. Most people are not her mother. Raymond finally lowered the documents into his lap. Oliver would have been proud of you. That nearly broke me more than anything else all evening. Because underneath the business meetings and trust clauses and polished conference tables, I was still just a widow missing her husband. I still reached for him some mornings before remembering the empty side of the bed would stay empty forever. Grief never disappears completely. It simply becomes quieter with time. When the car finally stopped outside my condo building near Lakeshore Drive, the rain had softened into a light mist drifting across the sidewalks. Raymond stepped out first and opened the umbrella above my head while we walked toward the entrance. Get some rest tonight, Helen, he said gently. Tomorrow will be difficult for her. I nodded once. I know. And for you too. He gave my shoulder a brief squeeze before returning to the car. I stood in the lobby for several seconds after he left, watching the elevator numbers slowly descend in silence. The building smelled faintly of fresh coffee and polished wood. Home. Simple. Quiet. Mine. Not because of wealth. Because peace lived there. That mattered more now. Upstairs, I changed into pajamas and stood alone in the kitchen staring at the bracelet box still sitting inside my purse. Vanessa had forgotten to give it back to me after everything collapsed downstairs. I opened the velvet lid slowly. Beneath the soft overhead light, the diamonds still shimmered exactly the way they had in the jewelry store 20 years earlier when Oliver first saw them. "She deserves something beautiful," he whispered back then, while secretly showing me the receipt in our car afterward because he was too excited to wait until Christmas. I sat quietly at the kitchen table holding the bracelet in my hands while rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking the lake. Around 2:30 in the morning, my phone rang. I already knew it would be Vanessa before I looked at the screen. For several seconds, I considered letting it ring. Instead, I answered quietly. "Hello." Silence first, then soft breathing. "Mom." Her voice sounded exhausted. "Fragile." "Yes." Another silence followed. I could hear distant traffic behind her and the faint echo of an elevator bell somewhere nearby. "Ethan left?" she whispered finally. I closed my eyes briefly. "Where are you?" "Outside the penthouse." Her voice cracked. "The security code does not work anymore." I looked down slowly at the bracelet resting against my palm. "Raymond moved quickly tonight. Faster than I expected." "The property belongs to the family trust," I said carefully. "Access protocols changed after the review." Vanessa started crying quietly after hearing that. Not dramatic sobbing, just the small, defeated kind of crying people do when reality finally arrives completely. "I do not know where to go," she whispered. "Mothers spend their whole lives preparing children to survive without them. Nobody prepares mothers for the moment their children suddenly need them again after causing the deepest wounds." I stared out toward the dark lake beyond my windows while memories drifted through me one after another. Vanessa learning to ride a bicycle. Vanessa sleeping on my chest during thunderstorms. Vanessa dancing barefoot in our kitchen with Oliver while pancake batter covered the counters on Sunday mornings. Love does not vanish simply because disappointment arrives. That is what makes family pain so complicated. "Come here," I said quietly. Her breathing caught immediately. "What?" "Come home." More silence. Then a broken little sound escaped her throat that reminded me painfully of the child she used to be. 45 minutes later, the doorman called upstairs to let me know she had arrived. When I opened my apartment door, Vanessa stood there completely soaked from the rain despite the umbrella she carried. Her mascara was gone. Her expensive hairstyle had collapsed into damp strands around her face. She looked smaller somehow, less constructed. Behind her, the hallway remained perfectly still and quiet. She stared at me for several long seconds before whispering, "I am sorry." Not polished, not strategic, just honest. I stepped aside slowly so she could enter. Vanessa walked into the apartment and immediately stopped near the living room windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The space was warm, peaceful, filled with books and framed photographs and soft yellow lighting. Not luxurious by billionaire standards, but real, human, lived in. She looked around slowly before turning back toward me with tears rising again in her eyes. "Dad loved this place," she whispered. "Yes," I answered softly. "He did." Vanessa lowered her head. "I spent years being ashamed that you lived simply." I walked toward her carefully before placing the bracelet box into her trembling hands. "Your father used to say something," I told her quietly. "He believed the poorest people in the world were the ones who needed everyone else to feel small in order to feel important." Vanessa opened the velvet box slowly and stared at the diamonds inside, while tears slipped silently down her face. "Mom, you were so busy trying to impress powerful people," I said gently, "that you forgot your own parents spent their entire lives becoming people worth respecting." Outside the windows, rain continued falling softly across Chicago, while somewhere far below, the black Rolls-Royce finally pulled away from the curb and disappeared quietly into the night.